The family sold her as Barren, but the widowed rancher said, "I don't need children, I need you." The sun was falling behind the jagged hills of Montana when Emma stood alone outside the house that wasn't hers anymore. The dry wind carried dust and silence, two things she'd grown used to. Her father had just sold her, not as a bride, but as barren property. "Take her," her stepmother had said coldly. "She's of no use here." The man who'd come to take her wasn't young. His name was Samuel Rourke, a widowed rancher known for keeping to himself, with a scar across his jaw that looked like it had been earned in a fight long ago. His eyes weren't cruel, but they were unreadable. When he handed her father a brown leather pouch, Emma heard the sound of coins clinking, like the final nails in her own coffin. No one looked at her as she climbed into his wagon. No one said goodbye. For the first few miles, neither of them spoke. Only the creak of the wheels and the call of crows broke the silence. Emma kept her hands folded tightly in her lap, afraid that even breathing too loud would make her seem ungrateful. Finally, Samuel spoke, his voice calm, low, the kind of voice that came from a man who'd seen too many winters. "They said you can't bear children." Emma's throat tightened. "That's what they say." He glanced at her then, his eyes softer than before. "Good," he said simply. "I don't need children. I need someone who can help me keep the ranch running." Those words stunned her more than any insult could. He didn't say them cruelly. Just, truthfully, like he'd already accepted it. The rest of the ride passed quietly. As the wagon rolled through the last ridge, his land came into view, a vast stretch of golden fields, wooden fences half broken, a small stable, and a house standing tall against the wind. It wasn't pretty, but it was alive. When they arrived, Samuel climbed down, offered her a hand. "You can sleep in the east room. My late wife used to keep the place tidy, but it's been a while. I'll fix what's broken." Emma hesitated before taking his hand. His palm was rough, warm, steady. It was strange, being helped instead of pushed. That night, after unpacking what little she had, Emma sat by the window. She could see the barn from there, where Samuel was still working under the light of a lantern. The world around her was so quiet, so wide. For the first time in years, she wasn't being shouted at or pitied. She didn't know if she should feel free or lost. The next morning, she woke before dawn to the sound of hooves and Samuel's voice calling to the horses. Without thinking, she wrapped a shawl around herself and went outside. The cold bit through her, but she didn't care. "You're up early," he said, surprised. "I can work," she replied quickly. "You said you needed help." He nodded. "Grab that bucket, then. Let's see if you know your way around stubborn animals." And so began her days on the ranch. Cleaning stables, mending fences, cooking simple meals. Samuel never spoke much, but when he did, there was no harshness. Only clarity. He treated her like a partner in labor, not a servant. Still, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong there, that one day he'd realize she wasn't worth keeping. One evening, after fixing a broken fence post, Samuel sat beside her on the porch steps. The sky was painted in oranges and pinks. "You work hard," he said. "Harder than most men I've hired." Emma smiled faintly. "You pay better than my family ever did." He let out a small laugh, a sound she hadn't expected from him. Then his tone shifted. "Why'd they call you Barren?" Her breath caught. "Because I was married once. For a year. My husband died in an accident before I could, her voice trembled. "After that, they said no man would want me." Samuel looked straight ahead, his jaw tightening. "People say too damn much." A pause. The sound of the wind brushing the tall grass filled the silence between them. "You know," he added quietly, "my wife, God rest her soul, couldn't have children either. Folks whispered behind our backs. Said I'd marry again, find a woman who could give me sons. But she was the only one who ever made this house feel like a home. When she passed, everything else stopped mattering." Emma turned to look at him, his face half lit by the dying sun. For the first time, she saw not the rancher who'd bought her, but a man carrying his own kind of emptiness. That night, as she lay in bed, she couldn't sleep. His words replayed in her mind. Maybe he wasn't looking for someone to fill the silence with noise, but someone who understood it. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of life settled. Samuel taught her how to ride properly, how to repair tack, how to listen to the land. Emma, in turn, brought warmth back into the kitchen, laughter into the evenings, music from an old fiddle she found in a trunk. The ranch began to feel less like a cage, more like a heartbeat. One evening, a storm rolled in from the north, wild and sudden. The winds tore through the valley, the animals panicked, and Emma ran into the barn to help Samuel secure the gates. A heavy beam came loose, crashing down dangerously close to her. Samuel lunged forward, pulling her away just in time. The storm howled around them, rain pouring through the cracks, thunder splitting the sky. When it was over, both were soaked, breathless, leaning against each other in the dark. His hand rested on her shoulder, hers clutched his coat. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough. She shook her head. "You saved me." He looked at her then, really looked. "No," he whispered, "you've been saving me for a while now." Outside, the rain began to ease, the smell of wet earth filling the air. Inside, something shifted between them, something neither dared to name. But that night, as the lantern flickered and Samuel lingered at her door before saying goodnight, Emma realized something terrifying and beautiful. She no longer feared being unwanted. She feared losing what she'd just begun to find. And as she lay awake, the question that wouldn't leave her heart was simple, trembling, and full of hope. Was this still just a transaction, or the beginning of something real? The morning after, the storm smelled like rain and new beginnings. The sky was washed clean, the earth dark and rich beneath their boots. Samuel's ranch looked different somehow, like it had survived something that changed it forever. Maybe they both had. Emma woke to the sound of Samuel hammering wood outside, repairing what the wind had broken. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped out, still feeling the echo of last night. The way his arms had pulled her close, the warmth in his voice when he'd said she'd been saving him. He looked up as she approached. "You sleep all right," she nodded, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "Didn't think I would, but I did." He smiled faintly. "Good. We've got fences down by the north field. Can't have the cattle wandering off." "I'll come," she said without hesitation. Samuel didn't argue. By now, he knew better than to treat her like someone who needed protection. Emma worked beside him, her sleeves rolled, mud on her skirt, her hands blistered, but there was a strange peace in that labor. Out here, under the wide Montana sky, there was no one to call her Barren, no whispers, no cruel eyes. Just the sound of wind and wood and two people rebuilding what the storm had torn apart. As the day stretched on, Samuel found himself watching her. When she didn't notice, the way she hummed while working, the quiet strength in her face. There was a light in her he hadn't seen in years, not since his wife, Clara. And that realization scared him. That evening, when the work was done, Emma cooked stew and baked cornbread. The smell filled the small kitchen. They sat at the worn wooden table, eating in silence at first, but it wasn't uncomfortable. "Your wife," Emma began carefully. "Clara, what was she like?" Samuel's spoon paused midair. For a moment, his eyes seemed to look somewhere far beyond the room. "She was kind, too kind. She loved this land more than I ever could. Said the wind here carried prayers." He gave a short, hollow laugh. "When she died, I stopped praying." Emma lowered her gaze. "Losing someone like that, it changes you." He nodded. "It does." Then, after a long pause, he asked softly, "What about you, Emma? That man you were married to, did you love him?" She thought for a moment. "I think I wanted to. But it wasn't really love. It was duty, survival. We were young, and people expected it. I kept waiting for something to grow between us, but before it could, he was gone." Samuel leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You ever wonder what love's supposed to feel like?" She looked up, surprised by his tone, gentle, curious. "All the time," she whispered. "Maybe like safety, or peace. Something that doesn't hurt." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, maybe that's it." For a long while, they said nothing. The fire crackled softly, shadows flickering across the walls. Something unspoken hung between them, fragile and warm. Over the next few weeks, that warmth grew. The days were busy. Fences to mend, hay to stack, supplies to fetch from town, but each day carried something new between them. A glance held too long. A smile that meant more than it should. One afternoon, While repairing the roof of the barn, Samuel slipped and nearly fell. Emma's scream cut through the quiet like thunder. She ran to him, heart pounding. He caught himself just in time, but when she reached him, her hands were shaking. "You scared me half to death," she cried, voice trembling. Samuel blinked in surprise at her fear, real, raw fear. "I'm fine, Emma, just lost my footing." She didn't answer. She just stared at him, eyes shining with unshed tears. For the first time, Samuel realized she wasn't just afraid of losing her place here, she was afraid of losing him. He reached out, brushing a muddy strand of hair from her face. "Hey, look at me. I'm right here." Her breath hitched, and before she could stop herself, she said it, soft, desperate, honest. "Don't ever leave me, Samuel." His hand froze midair. The words hit him harder than he expected. For years, he'd lived without needing anyone, without wanting anyone. But here she was, this woman the world had called useless, standing before him, trembling not from weakness, but from the kind of love that scared people into silence. He didn't answer right away, just looked at her, the wind tugging at his hat, the smell of rain still in the air. Finally, he said quietly, "I wasn't planning on going anywhere." That night, the ranch was quiet again, but it wasn't the same quiet as before. The air felt charged with something unspoken, something alive. Later, when Samuel stepped outside for air, he found himself staring up at the stars. He'd forgotten how beautiful they were, the kind of beauty you only noticed when your heart started to wake again. Inside, Emma sat by the window, the same way she had on her first night there. But this time, she wasn't staring out at an unknown world, she was watching him. For the first time, she felt like she belonged to something that wasn't built on pity or need, but choice. Still, deep down, a fear whispered through her heart, what if this quiet happiness wasn't meant to last? What if the world came knocking again, demanding a price for the peace they'd found? She didn't know, but as she closed her eyes and listened to the sound of his boots on the porch outside, she made herself a promise. Whatever came next, she wouldn't run. Not this time, because maybe, just maybe, she was finally where she was meant to be. And yet, as the night deepened, Samuel's voice echoed softly in her mind, his words about the prayers carried by the wind. Was this, what they were building together, an answered prayer? Or just the calm before another storm? The third dawn rose pale and cold, stretching long shadows across the ranch. Winter had begun to crawl into Montana's bones, and with it came change, quiet, creeping, unavoidable. Emma stood at the porch railing, arms folded, watching Samuel hitch up the wagon. He was headed into town for supplies, same as every month, but something in the air felt different this morning. He'd been distant the past few days, working longer hours, avoiding her eyes when she spoke. "Be back before dark," he said, tightening the reins. She tried to smile. "Don't forget the sugar this time." He almost smiled back, almost. Then with a nod, he flicked the reins and rode off down the dirt road. Emma stood there long after the wagon disappeared over the hill. She didn't know why her chest ached the way it did. Maybe because a small, terrified part of her thought, what if he doesn't come back? She turned and went inside. The house was warm, filled with the smell of coffee and hay, but too quiet. As she moved through the rooms, her eyes caught the small things Samuel had fixed over the months. Patched walls, polished floors, the fiddle she'd started playing again. The place that once felt like someone else's now carried both their fingerprints. She sat by the fire and began to mend an old coat of his, her fingers trembling slightly. Hours passed, the sky darkened, and then, hooves thundered in the distance. Emma rushed to the door. Samuel's wagon appeared, but it wasn't just him. A man sat beside him, thin, with a familiar cruelty in his eyes. Her heart froze. Her father, the same man who had sold her. The moment he jumped down from the wagon, that old chill crept back into her bones. "Well, if it isn't my lost daughter," he sneered, dusting off his coat. "You've done well for yourself." His eyes moved to Samuel. "Heard you took her in. Didn't think she'd last this long." Samuel's jaw tightened. "Why are you here?" Her father smirked. "Word travels fast in these parts. You've done well, Rourke. Thought maybe you'd want to make things official. I came to collect what's owed." Emma stepped forward, voice trembling but firm. You sold me once. You don't own me anymore. He laughed. You think life works that way, girl. You think a man gives away property for free. Samuel's voice dropped, low and dangerous. She's not property. Not yours. Not anyone's. Her father's grin faltered. He looked between them, sensing something deeper than what he'd bargained for. Be careful, Rourke. She's Barren. You'll die alone just like before. Samuel's hand clenched at his side, but he didn't reach for his gun. Instead, he looked straight at Emma and said clearly, so her father could hear every word, I don't need children. I need her. The words struck the air like thunder. Emma felt her throat tighten, her heart stuttering in her chest. Her father stared at him, then spat on the ground. Fool. He turned and climbed back onto his horse. You'll regret this. As he rode away, the sound of hooves fading into the cold dusk, Emma stood frozen, tears blurring her vision. Samuel turned to her slowly. You all right? She nodded. Barely. You didn't have to say that. I meant it. Her breath caught. You did. He stepped closer, his face unreadable, but his voice trembling with something raw. Emma, I lost everything once. My wife, my peace, my faith. Then you came here, and somehow, this place started to feel alive again. You did that, not out of duty or chance, but because you were meant to. Tears rolled silently down her cheeks. I don't care what they call you, he went on, voice breaking. Barren, broken, cursed, it doesn't matter. You gave me more life than anyone ever has. You gave me hope. Emma covered her mouth, a sob escaping her. He stepped forward and took her hands, rough and trembling. Stay, he whispered. Not because I bought you. Not because you owe me. Stay because you want to. She looked up into his eyes, those weathered, honest eyes that had seen too much loss and still found the courage to love again. I already did, she whispered. And in that moment, something in both of them finally healed. The wind outside shifted, carrying the scent of rain, just like that first night she'd arrived. But now, it didn't smell like sorrow. It smelled like promise. The months that followed were hard. Ranch work always was, but they faced it together. They laughed often, fought sometimes, prayed occasionally. The ranch flourished again, wildflowers growing where weeds once ruled. Sometimes, in the evenings, they'd sit on the porch, watching the sun dip below the hills. Samuel would rest his hand over hers and say softly, You were never barren, Emma. You just needed the right soil to bloom. Years later, folks in town still whispered about the widowed rancher who'd married the woman no one wanted. But if you ever visited that ranch, you'd see them there, two souls who'd found something deeper than bloodlines or names. You'd see the life they built, not with children, but with kindness, laughter, and love that outlived every cruel word the world had thrown their way. Because sometimes, the greatest families aren't born. They're chosen. And as the wind carried their laughter across the valley, it sounded almost like an answer to an old prayer. The kind that never needed words to be heard. Thank you so much for watching this story till the very end. Your support means more than words can ever say. If you felt the depth of this journey, don't forget to give it a like, share it with someone who needs it, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. Together, we'll keep bringing powerful stories to life, and your presence here makes all the difference.